Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jill Bloom, publisher of Building Enclosure. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether you're online or joining us from Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whichever platform you consume your content on. I'm here today with Dan Overby, who's the Director of Sustainability at Browning Day, located in Indianapolis, and Joe Yount, who's an architect at Ratio, who's also located in Indianapolis. And gosh, you guys, this is such an interesting time with the crisis and COVID-19. Can you tell me, this is a question for both of you, but Dan, why don't we start with you? Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves and your firms and kind of how everybody's set up?
Sure. So my firm, Browning Day, we're located in Indianapolis. We handle architecture, landscape architecture, interior design, land use planning, just design at a variety of scales, a variety of markets, and a variety of locations. So this is quite an interesting moment that we find ourselves in, where we are all, like everyone else, trying to find a way to service our clients and deliver our work and do it remotely. And there's been a learning curve for, I think, the industry in general. I feel fortunate that we had been moving toward remote desktops for several months, probably over a year. And so it hasn't been as tough of a transition in that way, just sort of day-to-day life. I just find it a little bit more difficult now, not having the direct contact and some of the in-person opportunities and such. But technology-wise, it hasn't been too disruptive yet. But it's still early in this. I think we're in week number 3 of the quarantine situation here. And yeah, Joe, what's your experience been like?
Oh, well, we've had a pretty world-class IT staff that set us up for remote work a few years back, and that's been really big for work-life balance for me. But this was actually fairly seamless, I felt. Now there's certainly the loss of face-to-face communication sometimes, but we're also we have offices all across the United States. So we're in Indianapolis, Champaign, Illinois, Chicago, Raleigh, North Carolina, and just in the last year, Denver, Colorado. So to some degree, we've been having to learn about working remotely just with people in other offices. So this has been a lot smoother than I had expected. So we're handling it okay so far.
Yeah, Jill, I'll throw this in there too. I think that had this situation happened to the AEC industry 10, 15 years ago, it would be a completely different conversation. I think one of the narratives I haven't really heard out in the media so much right now is just that fact that the blessing of the internet at the moment that we have, whether it's education or it's stuff that Joe and I are doing with our project teams, but it is more seamless because of the tools we have available. That's only been recently the case.
Yeah. I mean, how do you sanitize a hand sketch on a piece of paper? I mean, I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, so yeah, it is definitely different times. There's no doubt about it. There's some of the questions that have come up are you guys dealing with any critical infrastructure projects that you're currently working on?
At Ratio, we have some projects with the U.S. Post Service, mainly out of our Denver project or Denver office, that have been are considered critical for continuing infrastructure. So those are definitely going on as critical. But we're finding that most of our construction projects that are under construction right now are moving forward, we have certainly some hospitality projects that are kind of going crazy right now. But Dan, what are you guys starting to see?
I think on just the work on a variety of scales and varying degrees of complexity, it's a different story with different types of projects. I think it's still kind of early in that regard to see like what some of the long-term impacts will be at some of the larger scale work and such. It's I think we all are, I think like everybody in this country and around the world is kind of on a wait and see moment here, that when you hear about things for the foreseeable future, that's frustrating for all of us, not knowing, we're so used to instant gratification with our technology and our tools and such, and here we find ourselves facing something that we can't tell what's going to happen next. And so it's that does sort of encroach itself on day-to-day life, professionally, personally, I think in all ways. And you get to some of the larger scale projects, and I think forecasting becomes something really, really challenging at this moment.
For sure, for sure.
Have you guys had any projects, large scale projects that have been put on hold or just shut down right now? And how are you handling that?
We've had a few that have gone on hold, mostly just, I think a lot of people were trying to figure out how long this is going to last and what's it's going to be like on the other side. And, sometimes, Dan and I have been talking a lot about what's design going to look like on the other side of this. Something that's been happening in the past few years is that there's been such a focus on, millennials who want experiences over things, and the market has just really brought up all these wonderful places to have these experiences and gather. And it's tough right now because that's exactly what you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to gather in large groups. You're supposed to stay home and all these other things. So I think that, we're starting to wonder, like, what is design going to look like, when you come out of this crisis? And, something that I'm personally curious to see what happens is that we've seen this comeback of brass in the interior design market, which has copper in it, which has been known to kill viruses. So, it's been this sort of trend that's kind of come back in just about every West Elm ad you see. But, does this start to have some staying power on all of our handrails and doorknobs and things like that? Are we starting to do better things with our HVAC systems and daylight? Are we kind of increasing our scientific study on how that affects microbial communities and things like that? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the design world is like, maybe a year from now. So
I would just add to that. So Joe and I work together through our state chapter in Indiana with the American Institute of Architects. And in my professional career, every time there's been this crisis moment, something that we've really been confronted with, an unforeseeable emergency or crisis that maybe as a collective society we weren't as well equipped for as we thought. We've always, as an institution and as a profession, have asked ourselves, as those who are concerned about upholding health, safety, and welfare in the built environment, and that includes infrastructure, what can we do? What's our role and how can we help? And it's led to some really great discussions. And I see this moment here when we start to look at the way that we do public assembly. How do certain types of buildings look at how they're going to change in the future in preparation for this kind of situation, now that we know that this is possible and it has very real impacts. And it's, Joe and I both, as sustainable design leaders, thinking about these issues of resilience. And we talk about this a lot of times. You can look at, Boston talks about their water levels rising, and you look at different cities, it means different things. We have a lot of discussions, as many cities do, in our sandbox that we play in Indianapolis, about community resilience and what does that mean. And I think that this moment that we're in and this challenge that we're facing, it is directly related to this discussion about resilience. And it's a different side of a more resilient built environment and community resilience that maybe we weren't thinking as much about, because I don't think, 6 months ago, with the conversations we're having in sustainability and resilience, impending global pandemic wasn't on the agenda. There are a lot of really important issues that are on the agenda and continue to be, but now that we know this can happen, and it's, I think, caught all of us in one way or another kind of flat-footed, and you see right now we're trying to come up with a lot of solutions ad hoc, and it's great to see some political leaders leading it. Well, it's great to see some components of corporate America and corporate business leading in different ways, and you're seeing everybody trying to come together and figure this thing out. But we've never been here before in recent history, and how we move forward is a question that we can't yet answer. But I know I can speak for both Joe and I when I say that we're eager to find those solutions and try to figure out what that answer is as a collective professional community.
You know, never in my life did I think that the world would get shut down because of a virus. You know, it was just something that's been inconceivable. Nothing like this has, you know, ever happened in my life. And you know, it's kind of weird. I mean, I was born in 1981, and you know, we went through you know, 9/11, we went through the recession, and now we've got this. And it seems like we're getting bad news every 10 years. And bad news, it kind of like is formative in changing the way that we design. I mean, you know, after 9/11, you know, there was, you know, talk about how strong we're going to design our buildings. You know, after the recession, that undoubtedly changed the way we did business. And I'm sure that this COVID crisis will be no different. So.
Yeah, we were talking about copper. I was just with a friend of mine even this morning, but can you imagine? I mean, what would be the price difference to include copper in all those different spaces? Well, doesn't that significantly increase what that would cost?
Probably to some degree. I was talking with Allegion about this, I think earlier last week, and you know, a lot of their brass door offerings right now are coated brass, and then you don't have the benefit, but they do offer some solid uncoated brass. So I think the key would probably be to use a solid brass, but you know, a lot of our door handles are already stainless steel, which isn't cheap in and of itself. So I'm not entirely sure what the cost difference is off the top of my head, but it also seems that, you know, an appropriate approach might be to use, you know, coated brass on your door hinges, but then the solid brass on the door handles, your handrails and things of that nature. You know, the really high touch surfaces that you can kind of focus these things. You know, you're starting to see a lot of things just on our social media feeds about, you know, the foot operated door operators, you know, the waving, you know, automatic door operators. So, you know, there's some things that I think you might start to see just in terms of very quick renovations that don't even necessarily require an architect, but, you know, you're just calling some contractor out to upgrade your door hardware, you know, get some sanitizer stations located at your main entrances. Make sure you've got clear signage to all your bathrooms so that people know where they can go to wash their hands, which is pretty important. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do with our buildings, you know, from the air filtration systems to improve a building's ability to fight infection, but washing your hands, number one.
I think that we're going to find years from now that some of the residual effects of this moment and how we respond as a AEC community and how we respond as a broader society through hand washing and other good habits that we'll be more intentional about. We won't ever know for sure how many lives it saves, but we know that it's going to save lives. And another example for the built environment for you know, the architects and contractors and engineers is something like building filters. And Joe had touched on that. And coincidentally, I just today, Lindsay filed with Building Enclosure on the blog a post that I had been working on, which all of this conversation that's happening nationally about face masks and the degree to which they are effective. It got Joe and me and others thinking about building filtration among a variety of other issues. And I started going down this rabbit hole because I'm a nerd, Jill, like you didn't already know this. And I'm learning a lot about nanometers and micrometers and particle sizes. And I found that a coronavirus it's basically, I'm talking, so for any scientists that are, you know, listening to this at some point, I know that bacteria have different sizes and human hair follicles can differ in diameter. But if we just take in broad strokes, order of magnitude for conversation's sake, a coronavirus is basically the 10th of a size in diameter of a typical bacteria cell, which is a 10th of a diameter of a particle for smoke dust, which is about a 10th of a diameter of a human hair. So wow. That kind of puts into perspective how small the coronavirus is, just categorically. That is extremely small. And there aren't very many filters or cloths or anything that are going to catch that effectively. And what we found is, again, I know different building filters, different fiber sizes, it's going to catch things differently. But again, if we just talk categorically, big broad strokes, something like the MERV rating matters a lot. If you're at a MERV 8, you're not going to catch particles that small very well at all. And it makes a big difference when you go up to a MERV 13. And it's even better when you go up to a MERV 16. And sure, not a lot of mechanical systems will be able to support that. And there is a building cost to that too. These are bigger, beefier filters. But what we're finding out is that issue maybe elevates now in its importance. And it's something that we can advocate for in addition to some of the other issues that Joe mentioned. So we're still ascending the learning curve in terms of how we can positively affect this situation moving forward. But we're at the beginning of a really important discussion, and it's exciting and scary at times and daunting, but I think we'll be better for it in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that the healthcare design industry has a lot of things that they already know about here. In particular, there was a ambulatory care clinic that was attached to a new replacement hospital that I was working on a few years ago. Code would have required that the replacement hospital have 100% outside air in the hospital, but only 30% in the ambulatory care building, since it was a business occupancy. But the owner's expectation, they made clear to us that, this is where people are going when they're sick. People are going to the emergency room for other things. So really, this is where people are the sickest, because they're going to the doctor with a cough or something like that. And that's where they really wanted to have the 100% outside air. So we grew our air handling units, got the heat recovery units to be as efficient about it as we could. Sorry, I'm bumbling here. And then, I think we also started talking about, the UV filtration in that rooftop air handler. And, it was a really special building it when it all ended up. But yeah, I mean, this was their expectation in the healthcare industry about 10 years ago. So we want 100% outside air. And this is another step that you can take to control infection, although there was a cost just because all our air handler units got bigger and used a little bit more energy and things like that. So
you guys, Dan, you were telling me earlier that both you and Joe are part of AIA there locally. What types of services do they have that you've been able to lean on that would have helped you, that possibly might help some other architects in other parts of the country, or just how they can lean on AIA for information?
That's a great question. So yeah, Joe and I are both involved with the AIA Indiana chapter with their committee on the environment, and we as a collective have a lot of really great discussions around these issues of sustainability and health and wellness and such. AIA National has provided a lot of really great resources for firms. There's a lot of work that they've already done with some of these past crises that Joe referenced earlier, where they look at disaster preparedness and how you can help respond within your community. There's also a lot of great resources from a business side, how to navigate some of these really precarious economic waters that we're now venturing into. And that's really important because I know in this moment, I've heard from multiple firms near and far this week of, right now I'm hearing about, especially with smaller firms, the majority of architecture firms are 10 people or less. And if I recall AIA stats correctly, I think 75% of all firms are 10 people or less, even though half the architects in the country are in larger firms. But if you take them on like a firm by firm basis, most are small, and this is really strenuous right now, this moment. And the longer this carries on, the more of a stressor it's going to be for larger firms. And the volatility in the marketplace is going to affect credit, which is going to affect construction, which then gets to what Joe and I do. And there's a lag effect, but we are seeing stressors now with some really great firms. And I do appreciate that AIA sees it from both an internal and outward standpoint, what we can do as a profession to try to weather this as best that we can, because it's again, no one has a crystal ball and can see the future, and we really are grasping for solutions and answers in this moment.
Yeah, and I know that our firm leadership has really been working hard with our accountants, our lawyers, and our HR people to understand, how some of these different stimulus packages and other things are going to be able to help us get through this. Especially when a lot of us have had kids shut down out of school, but AIA is also Indiana is also releasing. Some emails with tips and tricks from with a lot of the same thing from HR, legal and accounting firms for some tips for some of the smaller firms, and from a lot of the same people that we're using. It's just unknown right now. It's like, how do you how do you get work done when your kids are home from school to what sort of stimulus packages are out there? What's it going to mean for your health insurance? I think the AIA has been able to offer some links to that, in addition to some of our design things we've been talking about. And the things that Dan and I have just been talking about right now, we're also working on trying to, once we kind of get past this, how do we just get work done? How do we kind of reconfigure our business operations? We're kind of working on getting a memo out to our membership to talk about, how's this going to change how we design, which is, very heavy on our minds right now. So.
Got it. You guys were also mentioning, we talked a little bit more about healthcare earlier, but something else I was thinking of is do you have any atypical projects, or have you seen any for critical care, even like things such as 3D printing parts for ventilators, or is that anything that you've ever seen come up even in the past, or can see possibly coming up in the future?
I have not at Ratio, although I believe that I've seen a couple of architecture firms that have 3D printers start to do a little bit with that on some LinkedIn news feeds and things like that. But I wish I could quote the name of the firm that was doing that. But Dan, have you seen anything like that?
Not right offhand, but just what I've seen in some other industries and I would venture to guess we'll probably see it first start to happen with maybe certain types of building product manufacturers that are maybe their queue is drying up, their backlog isn't what they want it to be, but they're also seeing this very acute need, and that they can perhaps pivot. And if they're working on textiles or different things, maybe they can be, if we're having this massive shortage of, say, face masks, and there's going to be, if the CDC or the federal government start having some sort of recommendation or something even more heavy-handed for us with regard to face masks, I wonder to what degree industrial size manufacturing can start to step in and be a part of the solution. And it would be yet another example of how the free market is starting to lead, like we've seen it in so many other sectors in the last few weeks.
I mean, one thing to think about is, flexibility. I mean, it takes a lot of flexibility to be able to turn on a dime to, be making carpet, to be making face masks, as you kind of alluded to. But I was reading up on, GM's process to adjust their manufacturing facilities to be producing ventilators, and it sounds good in theory, but really, like, the making of a ventilator is something that needs to happen in a clean room on a table, and it's not like a big assembly line where you're trying to swing out the door of a Buick. This is so I think they had to use some clean rooms in Kokomo, Indiana, to kind of reconfigure those as sort of a bench and table sort of building environment. So, I wonder, what does flexibility in building layouts mean to us in the future? I mean, the more you're able to the more you specialize things, sometimes the less flexible it can be, but there's something to think about there. I don't really know what it's going to be in the future, but, the companies that have been able to be flexible have really been able to rise to the occasion at this time.
And some things that I get to thinking about is, I get to think about certain types of buildings, and I think about right now where, if healthcare personnel aside, that capacity issue is there, but in terms of the beds, and we're seeing a lot of really makeshift solutions to try to create more beds, and yet the hospitality industry is hurting so bad because people aren't traveling. So as an idea, I get to think to myself, well, maybe when we move forward, we start to rethink some of these typologies. Well, there are a bunch of beds in separate rooms, and can there be a preparedness plan where certain maybe hotels that have proximity to some healthcare facilities, that they have an action plan where in pretty short order they can make some adaptations, and suddenly they can start to have deals worked out where they still have revenue and they can stay in business, but now you've just increased capacities for beds. And as just maybe something that a firm like mine or Joe's can start to do in the markets that we work with, to start to, now that we know this can happen, to try to come up with plans that can help both from a practical standpoint on the healthcare side, but also help economically with those enterprises that are, say, in hospitality.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that, if you think about, getting people in, I mean, do you set up your loading dock and your freight elevator to be able to get a bed up there? Do you set up your hotel rooms to be able to have negative pressurization and exhaust and things like that? And then, what's the medical equipment that's able to come in there? I mean, I don't know if you're going to have like the critical power plugs and things like that, but, some hotels, I want to say I've read about a couple that are doing that. And, this starts to talk about, the idea of a flexible infrastructure where, you can bring in a little bit more to be able to respond at a time like this. So.
Yeah, it gets into this notion, Jill, about that I know Joe and I both subscribe to, and AIA has a position on, which is a lot of discussions about infrastructure and buildings as a layer of infrastructure. And some of these existing facilities for hospitality or what have you aren't ready to just easily adapt to that right now because of those technical reasons that Joe mentioned and a variety of other logistics. But I wonder moving forward if we can make a more resilient built environment by rethinking some of our facilities and some of the sectors, some of the building types that we work with, and that will be better in the long run. And when this happens again someday, we'll be better prepared for it. You mentioned infrastructure level projects earlier, but I would say what we're all confronting right now is a very real issue of being reminded of the limited capacity of infrastructure. And I use that word kind of in the abstract, whether it's making sure that you've got a good enough Wi-Fi connection to stream video and do e-learning and even have a conversation like this, or it comes from making sure that you have continuity with regard to power. If this virus would have hit at the beginning of winter here in Indianapolis, it could be a whole different type of threat level with strain on capacity. I just wonder how even grocery stores, there's a huge backup of groceries. We know this, but what's stocked up on the shelves can run out pretty quickly when people are feverishly going out and getting things, and just wondering if there's however we convey the big stockpile that we do have to get to people in a more effective way, and you can avoid some of those issues, or maybe just that experience in general, if these things can be better now that we know that this scenario is a possibility. That can we make the systems of conveyance and of delivery of amenities and critical services be better prepared for this in a variety of different ways in our lives moving forward.
Yeah, and I think oh, go ahead, Jill. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say this is gonna make us rethink everything that we're doing. And I know, Dan, you had mentioned before that you are also an assistant professor at, where is it? Is it Ball State?
That's right.
Okay.
You recalled correctly. That's right.
I can't even imagine what is happening with those students. And I mean, how tragic that these college kids, I mean, who didn't love your college years? And now all of a sudden you're sent back home and you can't get together the way you have been, and trying to like do Zoom meetings like this just to interact with your kids. I know I've got a senior in high school. It's like, they're missing out on so much. But how is it changing with you, even in that role, with how you're communicating, how you're staying in touch? And, I think that even those ideas can help all of us, whether we're architects or designers or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. That was a good one. I remember we were talking earlier, and I kind of threw that out there about Ball State. You recalled correctly. Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor there and with our College of Architecture and Planning, and we're going through Studio right now. So for the viewers who might not know, it's where we get a whole group of students together several times a week for in-person discussion and development of projects. And there's a lot of dynamic exchange and sharing of resources, and we come together as a collective, and you point at things and draw things, and it's very collaborative and very immersive. And yeah, so this creates a little bit of a wrinkle there. And I have 21 students right now in the CAP Indianapolis Center. We have a master's program that has a studio in Indianapolis, and we're finalists in the Soar Decathlon competition with NREL, and the final report was due this week, and we have a video due in another week, and we're trying to, it was supposed to be a live presentation like everything else that's gone virtual, but from the standpoint of instruction, it's the classes, that was pretty seamless. That was doing stuff like this, but in the studio environment, that was a very unique challenge that I'm really, really proud of my students, just the attitudes they've had with all this disruption. And we've been able to come together, and we ascended the learning curve. We've come together, everybody had the right attitudes, and it's been really great. And I think we're in a moment right now here in the last month of the semester where it's working well, and we're having a great time, and it's engaging and dynamic, and they have final reviews next week. So for some of their presentations of what they've been working on, but it's like so many other things, it's a bit fluid, and we're constantly trying to improve it. And I do know I have a few thesis students that I'm advising, and the fact that I might not see them in person face to face again is kind of sad. It's sad that we can't get together for graduation. It's sad that that seniors, and I mean, that are involved in sports and such, we've heard those stories. It does kind of, you know, and even my kids, they announced yesterday, my kids are really little, they're in elementary school, but that they're not getting together anymore, that they've already perhaps seen their teacher in the classroom for the last time at that grade level, that they're going to go back at, you know, the next cycle. It's just, yeah, it's education. That's a whole other podcast we could have here. Jill, I'd love to be a part of that discussion, but it's been a challenge, and it's one though that we've all embraced and been open to, realizing that this is this big experiment that we're all being thrust into, willingly or unwillingly, and we're getting into it like everyone else and using the tools that we have available, and we're making it work, and I'm really proud of my students.
That's awesome. Well, I think education in general might be changing a whole lot as we move forward. And even you guys as architects, how often do you guys have manufacturers come in and do lunch and learns that you've been involved with?
Not very often these days.
Right now, for sure.
We're starting to see some virtual requests where they've offered to send you like a $15 Uber Eats card. I think there was a lighting rep in town.
I was wondering how they're going to send
that was pretty creative, but
yeah. But you know, Joe, it's an important question, because that, from a sales standpoint, that face-to-face matters. That when they're in that room that day and somebody has a problem on a project, the connection is the difference maker. And you know, with our firms, business development, going out and meeting people, that FaceTime matters. And how do you do that right now? You know, it's again another one of those learning curves we're all going up, but it's yeah, those are some of the many unknowns that we're all wrestling with.
For sure.
Yeah. Do you guys do a lot of your CEUs online? I mean, clearly at, you know, Building and Closure, we do webinars all the time for CEUs, but is that, I mean, I'm sure those numbers will increase, but how do you guys normally get your CEUs right? I mean, before the impact, you know, the crisis of COVID-19 has impacted us all, but how do you think that's going to change? How does it change how you get CEUs and how you do your lunch and learns, or is it all going to be online? Like, how do you think it's going to change in general for your firms?
Well, for me, I've, for a variety of reasons, always enjoyed going to conferences. I just think that being able to just be immersed in the environment, you eliminate some distractions, you network and meet new people, and you sit there, you're kind of captive, and I think then more focused and receptive to a lot of things. But a lot of, in fact, pretty much every opportunity to do that in the near term has been canceled or rescheduled. And just today, I went ahead and actually spent money on what I expect to be a quality online learning experience, that I think it's an emerging revenue stream for education providers now, because I can't count on those live venues anytime soon. And I still have a lot of credentials and license related education that I need to fulfill. And I am willing to spend some money for quality education opportunities online. And I'd be interested to hear what Joe says about that too. But yeah, it's a new thing we have to consider now.
Well, we were supposed to take a trip down to Florida for spring break, and I was hoping to, you know, have the iPad out and, you know, do some online CEUs there, just sitting in the sun. Nope. I got to jump to plan B, and I usually like about half of my CEUs, just getting a little bit of vitamin D on vacation, and you know, doing a lot of you know, CE Center, you know, a lot of the online CEUs that way. But that option is not open this year, so I'll have to figure out a plan B. But yeah, I also do a fair amount of conferences. You know, sometimes our volunteer work with AIA can count for a little bit here and there. You know, anything that's got a lead or a well credit for it, you know, Dan and I have to jump all over that though.
Yeah.
That's right. We're trying to like hint at who may be watching who can offer some of that stuff.
I love it. Well, I know that you guys are so busy and everyone's dealing with so many issues just surrounded with COVID-19 and how they're handling it and overcoming obstacles. And I do really appreciate your time. But before we close, is there any one last tip that you might have available to offer other architects that might be watching as to how they, you know, one last, or maybe this is even better. What's the silver lining? What do you think the silver lining is in all of this?
Well, I was going to say, I think we got to stay positive. I mean, there will come the day that we all go back out into the world when the social distancing kind of lifts up a little bit, and I think we're all excited for that day. I mean, the world will be different then, but I think we need to be careful to not, you know, get too defensive and not be and not give up the things that make our, you know, our cities and our urban spaces just such great interactive places and places for people to enjoy being outside and being with other people and to have the face-to-face communication. You know, that's going to be so important, and it's going to be important that, you know, we think about, you know, how can we sort of flex up to meet the occasions of disasters, but still maintain, you know, the things that have made great life through our buildings, our public spaces, and our infrastructure for thousands of years. And, you know, I think it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, but I think we have to, you know, stay positive and stay excited about it because people, they're going to want to get back out. They'll be back eventually. So.
Yeah, which leads to what I was going to offer up, which is, I think we're discovering right now that we maybe don't need to print as many drawings as we thought we did. Maybe we don't need to have as many in-person meetings as we thought we did. But what we're discovering through all of this is how much we miss it, how important the face-to-face time is, how important relationships and those interactions are. And so while we might not, from a strictly business and delivery standpoint of the design services that we offer, while we can do so much remotely, I think we're finding out now just how much we really do value that direct person-to-person contact in those relationships.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Well, in the meantime, thank goodness for meetings like this where we can get on and see each other and have these conversations. But again, I really look forward to keeping in touch with you guys because so much just changes hour by hour and you never know when there's going to be something else we need to discuss or share. But I do truly appreciate your time and I appreciate everyone watching today. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me at bloomj@BNP Media. That's B as in boy, N as in Nancy, P as in Paul, media.com. Or you can click on the Contact Us tab on buildingenclosureonline.com and you can have, that'll lead you to my email as well. And once again, thank you very much, gentlemen, and everybody have a great day. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.